Hi everyone, on behalf of the Southeast New England Program Network, welcome to our third webinar in the SNEP Network Climate Leadership Exchange Series on revitalizing waterfront communities through comprehensive redevelopment. My name is Leah Soloway from the New England Environmental Finance Center, and I'm happy to be assisting with logistics for today's program. Today we will be engaging in a facilitated conversation with national leaders and showcasing the amazing work that is happening in the SNEP Leadership Exchange, which you will learn about shortly. Before we get into that, there are a few logistics to keep in mind. First, everyone will be on mute to ensure audio quality. You will be able to ask questions by typing them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We really look forward to answering your questions, so please type them in at any time. Additionally, you can request a certificate of attendance for joining this webinar. Now for a little bit about the SNEP Network. Here you can see a map of the Southeast New England Program region. The SNEP Network's mission is to empower communities to achieve healthy watersheds, sustainable financing, and long-term climate resilience through the management of stormwater and restoration projects. This webinar series is one of the many ways we strive to serve this region. If you want to know more, you can check out snepnetwork.org for more information. On that note, I'd like to hand things over to Joanne Throwe, President of Throwe Environmental and Senior Fellow at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. Joanne, please take it away.
Hey, thanks, Leah, and apologies to everybody that we were a couple minutes late. We had some audio technical difficulties, but bear with us as we're all used to this. So thanks for joining us. This is session 3 in our leadership exchange, and as Leah just was describing, this is part of an effort we are building with the SNEP Network, and we are so pleased to focus our efforts on one community, Wareham, Massachusetts, which you'll hear a little bit about in a few minutes. But today, what we're hoping is sharing so much information with all of you. This is, as I said, the third, and our focus today is on revitalizing waterfront communities through comprehensive redevelopment. And we have quite a list of guests today to join in the conversation. So with that, though, before I introduce our guests, we have from Burlington and Boston and Chattanooga and Annapolis and Tillman Island. I first want to go through a couple key points here. As we are moving forward on this leadership exchange, although we are focusing just on one community, please note that we recognize that these themes are just so common throughout all of the communities who are listening. And with that, we have taken the liberty of having multiple ways that we are trying to share the results of these sessions. So when we take a theme and we have a closed session and we spend the morning working together with other experts in other communities who have been there, done that, have great ideas. They are the experts out there. And we bring that to our selected community, which is Wareham, but we invite other guests to attend as well. And those guests are from the region. We ask them to listen in, share their questions, expand the ideas. And then what our hope is to then share that with you in 2 ways. One is through this webinar, but also with our podcasts. And if you haven't already listened to them, I'm sure you've done so, but please go to the SNEP Network and enjoy those podcasts that accompany these sessions, because we know we have so much to offer here with our experts and limited time to do so. So I encourage you to go to snepnetwork.org and listen to them. More will be uploaded very soon. So with that, I have a few takeaway themes that I want to share with you about our session that happened this morning before I introduce the guests. So this morning, as I said, our focus is on revitalizing waterfront communities through comprehensive redevelopment. And Dan, Kyle, and I, my partners in crime in organizing these efforts for the SNEP Network, we had a few moments to come together, and here were some of the key themes we heard this morning. Assemble a dedicated leadership team that builds support around consensus, very important. Let the community drive the problem definitions and solutions process. Pursue innovative partnerships where outside groups can play their most effective role. Balance mixed-use waterfront uses, such as water-dependent, water-supported, water-enhanced, in the right way for your town. Also, make sure public access to the waterfront is maintained and isn't developed out. Plan with the future in sight. Be flexible, knowing that things planned, zoning should change as your community does. And lastly, never lose sight of the unique character of your community. And with that, we have so many unique communities here. And Kyle, if I can have you put up our introductory slides of who's joining us today.
So it is all right, so are you able to hear me now? Yes, okay, perfect. So let me put up these slides.
Okay.
All right.
Kyle, if you can make it a big screen.
Yep, should be able to see this.
All right, so again, I'm Joanne Throwe. I'm joined by Dan Nees, Center for Resilience Innovation, and the amazing Kyle Gray. Next. Okay, from Wareham this morning, we had a few members, but representing them was Kenneth Buckland. So folks, please mute your phones, please. Please mute, there's a background noise. All right, Judith Whiteside from Town of Wareham and Peter Teitelbaum, all from Wareham joining us. So we've asked Ken just to be the one to join us this morning. We also had Bryce Turner from BCT Design Groups and Eileen Fogerty. Both were bringing a wide range of expertise, but from City Dock specifically from Annapolis, but also other parts of Maryland and also from the West Coast. So next slide. All right, we also have Magdalena Ayed from the Harbor Keepers in Boston. Next. And from Burlington, we had Grace Cifo from City of Burlington and Richard Hassler, who is representing Burlington today, who is acting Community Works Project and Policy Specialist. Next. We have Miguel Salinas from Talbot County, Eastern Shore of Maryland. He's going to talk about Tillman Island, as is Jim Klein from Lardner Klein Associates. And we had Kelly Collins Choi representing the state of Maryland, the Working Waterfronts. She was with us this morning. Jim Williamson, River City Company from Chattanooga, Vice President Planning and Development. And we have Karen Hunt. She's Regional Planning Agency Director of for Community Planning and Design. Justin Steinman, City of Chattanooga, Strategic Capital Planning Manager, and the also outstanding Sharita Allen from the City of Chattanooga, Deputy Administrator for Economic Development. Next slide. All right, so Ken, I want you to just give a brief overview of Wareham for the people who haven't joined us in the last two sessions, so we can start off with some of the community characteristics. Ken. Ken Buckland, we can't hear you. Boy, we're having audio problems today. I'm sorry, everybody. Ken?
Sure. Thank you very much.
Oh. Ken, I'm sorry. Ken, I'm gonna stop you. It's just not coming through. Kyle, why don't you take this over? I think you come in loud and clear.
Absolutely. You can hear me all right, Joanne?
Yes, I can. Sorry, Ken.
Sorry about the technical difficulties today, everybody. GoToWebinar is just not working with us. But to start off with, this is Wareham, Massachusetts. It's our exchange community, and it's the one we're focusing all of our efforts on through this entire series. So as Joanne mentioned, we've had 2 webinars already. This is the 3rd one, and this is the biggest one, focusing on Wareham's waterfront redevelopment. So looking at Wareham, it's a small community of about 20 or 22,000, located right on Buzzards Bay in Massachusetts. In the summer months, the population doubles to around 44,000 as tourism, really drives people to come to Wareham. But Wareham is also right on the edge of Cape Cod, and it's traditionally known as the gateway to the Cape. So, as residents are going through Wareham to the Cape, the town is really trying to develop its own economic model where it's no longer just serving as a pass-through to the Cape, but residents are coming to Wareham itself and, staying there, spending money there, investing, drawing in new residents and businesses, all of that stuff. So that's what we're looking at with Wareham. We've touched on some green infrastructure projects and resilience, but in terms of waterfront redevelopment, they're trying to focus their efforts on this downtown area in the top photo. You'll see that's Merchants Way. It's a town-owned parcel of land right along the river. And, they're really trying to aim for some mixed-use development to revitalize this area of the heart of downtown. So it's right along the river. We have the railroad tracks, though, that do impede on the riverfront access. So there are some environmental challenges. The lack of economic growth right now is posing some other challenges. So we're trying to see how comprehensive redevelopment can really push this area forward. So that's what I have on Wareham right now. Joanne, would you like me to just go into the next case studies?
So Kyle, I think GoToWebinar actually likes you a lot. So why don't you keep going on?
Let's stick with it. Sounds good. All right. So the approach that we've taken to this entire webinar series has been bringing in case studies on a specific theme related to Wareham's redevelopment. And this one is, this is the big one. So we're focusing on waterfront redevelopment. We've had 5 tremendous case studies come together for this session. This is our 2nd time looking at Annapolis, Maryland. And for this webinar, we're focusing on the City Dock project. We've heard from Boston, Massachusetts, Burlington, Vermont, Tillman Island, and Maryland's Working Waterfronts program, and then finally Chattanooga. So we'll take a peek at all of those. So starting off, we have Annapolis, Maryland. So this is the City Dock area that we're focusing on for this webinar. City Dock is the downtown economic hub of Annapolis. On the right side in this bottom left photo, you'll see that there's a lot of impermeable surface. There's a huge parking lot, and on the opposite side, we have some other roadways, other parking lots, development. So the natural space in this downtown area, the public access to the waterfront just isn't there. In terms of the economy, some of the retailers in this area, you'd think they would have some of the best locations, but with the parking lot and the other social hazards, the economic growth just isn't what the city wants it to be yet. So the plan for City Dock, which was first laid out in the ULI, that's the Urban Land Institute, and their study of the downtown area, found that there needed to kind of be a revitalization of City Dock, and that's going to include raising the City Dock area to accommodate for sea level rise. It's also going to include some economic initiatives and some more access to the waterfront to engage the community in this new vision. So on the bottom right, you'll see kind of a schematic for what City Dock might look like in the future. We have some green spaces. It's a lot more walkable. It's more pedestrian friendly. We have more economic growth, in this downtown area. And this is all happening while they're taking into account sea level rise in the next couple of decades. So we also heard this morning from Eileen Fogerty, who could not be with us this afternoon. But Eileen worked in she's a planner who has been working on this City Dock project in Annapolis, and she's also lended her expertise to a number of different cities across the country, both on the East and the West Coast. So when Eileen spoke this morning, she told us, a little bit more about some of the planning projects that she's been involved with. And by and large, the one that she, recommended the most in terms of the takeaways that could be applied to the East Coast was Santa Cruz, California. They had some issues following an earthquake, which really forced them to redevelop from the bottom up. They had to kind of start from scratch. So Santa Cruz is in an area that's a little bit out of the way, similar to Wareham, being on the way to Cape Cod. So Eileen mentioned that a lot of these takeaways, in terms of keeping the historic character of the community and things of that nature, would all be, well applied on the East Coast and in southeastern New England. So moving on to another case study that we have Burlington, Vermont. Burlington in the 1980s was an industrial waterfront. It was not, meant to be a waterfront that drew in a lot of tourists or, a place where residents really spent a lot of time. But over the last 3 or 4 decades, it's really changed. There have been a number of different initiatives in the town to redevelop the waterfront. On the top photo, you see Church Street, which is Burlington's kind of main street. It's the economic hub of downtown. There are restaurants, retailers, you name it. And, it's really created a sense of place in this downtown area, all built off of the waterfront. So we heard from Richard Hasler, who is, has spent a good portion of his career in Burlington, and he was a great resource for us to have as we learn some of the key takeaways from Burlington's redevelopment, and we'll hear from him a bit more later. All right. Moving on to Tillman Island, Maryland. It's on Maryland's eastern shore. This is a lot smaller community than both Burlington and Annapolis. So we're looking at a community with around 1,000 people. It's a historically working waterfront. We have a lot of agriculture, fishing, oystering, you name it. And these traditional waterfront uses are really being put to the test right now, because as these industries start to decline and the community is looking to bring in tourism and new residents, they're trying to figure out how to balance these mixed uses. And that can be a really difficult thing to do. And, balancing mixed uses was a running theme that we heard throughout our entire session this morning. We also have Chattanooga, Tennessee. I think this is one of our most well-rounded case studies that we've brought into this exchange so far. We have instances of green infrastructure, resilience, smart growth, redevelopment, you name it. So again, in the 1980s, similar to Burlington, Chattanooga had an industrial waterfront. They embarked on the 21st century waterfront plan that really helped to develop the downtown area into one that was more connected to the water. So over the course of the first decade or so of the 2000s, Chattanooga really saw this plan come to fruition. So they've kind of gone through a couple different phases of redevelopment. There was the first one that took place in the 80s. It's happened again throughout the first quarter of the 2000s. And then looking forward, Chattanooga seeing the need to continue redevelopment. Some problems have been solved, but other challenges have arisen. So they're really looking to keep the connectedness to the water and develop a sense of place in the downtown area for our residents to make sure it's not just driven by tourism. For some reason, keeping with the technical difficulties of the day, the Boston slide is not showing, so I will just briefly go over Boston. Boston, Massachusetts, it's one of the country's, especially New England's, one of its greatest waterfront communities. And in terms of redevelopment right now, Boston is really taking the lead with making its redevelopment efforts tie into its climate planning. So Boston recently completed its Climate Ready Boston plan, which takes a comprehensive look at how the city is going to plan for climate, but also looks at how it'll tie those climate concepts and those initiatives into redevelopment moving forward. So we did not have anyone from the Boston team join us this morning, unfortunately, but we do have Magdalena Ayed, who is joining us this afternoon. And she is with Boston's Harbor Keepers. It's a grassroots nonprofit that really works to engage the community, especially in areas where they might not traditionally be engaged. So, in all of these communities, we see redevelopment happening, and it's all community driven. So that was really, the running theme for our case studies in this session. And I would love to turn it back over to Joanne so we can hear a bit more from all of the great leaders and presenters that we have with us today.
Terrific. Thanks, Kyle. And let's hope no more technical difficulties with GoToWebinar. You ended with Boston and Magdalena, and I'm going to start with you, Magdalena. My first question, I'm going to pose some questions to all our guests, and then I'm going to open it up for people listening in because I know they'll have questions as well. Magdalena, you and I had a great conversation recently, and people can hear more about Boston's efforts on the podcast. You like how I plug that? But Magdalena, can you speak about the process of ensuring that the people in the community are front and center in the redevelopment planning process? How have you met people where they are?
Joanne, I'll unmute
Thank
Magdalena.
you.
Sorry, Magdalena, we're just gonna, looks like you're still muted from earlier. Okay, try enabling your microphone.
Okay, there, thank you. I was clicking mute. Sorry about that. I was clicking unmute and it wasn't working, so I'm glad it is. So thank you so much. Could you just repeat the question so I have it in its entirety so I can answer as fast as I can?
Sure. So can you speak about the process of ensuring that the people in the community are front and center in the redevelopment planning process? How have you met people where they are?
Exactly. I think this is really a great and a critical question, and the way that we've been approaching it, and we've had trials and tribulations, but really the best way that we think that this works in terms of moving forward with robust economic development, but at the same time doing resiliency planning, is really the inclusion of the communities right at the front of the conversation. So, meaningful community engagement doesn't just mean sort of like an invitation to meetings. It means really from the get-go. That might even mean including them in RFPs, right? Like having them have a real voice, maybe even as far as like who the consultants should be in terms of the resiliency planning. And somebody mentioned earlier the public-private partnerships are really critical, but really the inclusion, it has to be meaningful, robust, and really diverse. You have to really look at each community that you're working in and say, okay, who are the people living here right on the coastline, and what are their needs, and how can it be really valuable to this process from the beginning. So not sort of coming in at the middle of the process or towards the end, really having those conversations and allowing them really to voice their concerns, their needs, even being part of like the design process. Like we recently did that with Vision Chelsea Creek. It's a process that where we're doing visioning and community stakeholder engagement planning on the Chelsea Creek in an industrial area. And we really had the community sort of learn about design processes and then sort of join in. What does resiliency design look like, and how does it fit in with your narrative, with your experience, your life experience living on this waterfront? What are your needs? So really robust engagement is really at the core, and it really should be done from the beginning of the process and throughout the process toward the end, and even when the project is over, like continuously tying in this engagement, stakeholder engagement throughout the whole year, essentially, not just during the project timelines.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So my next question is for Tillman Island, Talbot County, Eastern Shore. This will be for Miguel and for Jim. I think you can, Miguel, you can get us started with this question. Talk a bit about the need to balance a community's traditional waterfront uses while still appealing to new residents and tourists. How do you pursue mixed uses and incorporate resilience? Jim or Miguel, you want to?
You have to unmute. We mass muted folks at the beginning of the webinar so they can't unmute themselves.
Okay, Miguel, you should be unmuted.
I am, Joanne. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Sure. It's par for the course today. Okay. So talk a bit about the need to balance a community's traditional waterfront uses while still appealing to new residents and tourists. How do you pursue a mixed use and incorporate resilience? People are being so patient with us today.
Thanks for that question. And Jim, I'm sure you'll jump in too, since you had to deal a lot with this in the development of the master plan for that village. Tillman for over 100 years has been historically a working waterfront village, mainly in the fisheries industry, but some agriculture as well. But it's changing, and so native Tillmanites will describe it as the been here's and the come here's, and so they complain a lot about the come here's and their different expectations of what life in Tillman should be like, which is different than the historical expectations of people who have grown up there. So in the village master plan that we developed, we had to take into account what those different expectations were. One thing that did come out loud and clear, though, in that master plan from the groups that had grown up there and the group that participated that had moved there recently, was that they all valued that waterman's way of life, that historic working waterfront, and didn't want to lose the essence of what Tillman was. And they were concerned that the remaining waterfront properties that we had, which were being used for working waterfront businesses in the marine industry, that we were going to lose those permanently. And so the master plan that we developed with Jim Klein's help in that process really tried to achieve that type of balance. There were expectations from some of the people that moved there that they wanted to see more tourism, more nature-based tourism, but overall, everybody agreed that the preservation of the working waterfront properties were most important. So, so to that end, we are working to do that through regulatory changes that would create a new zoning district that would prohibit a lot of uses that are incompatible with that marine-based nature of that village along the waterfront, and prohibiting out those uses that were incompatible with that nature. And so we're going through that process now. Tillman is a mixed-use community. It's a small village. There's only about 750 people in the village. About 40% of the homes in Tillman are considered second homes by homeowners who come there during the summer to enjoy the village life. But for those 100 plus years, when you have a property that's a fisheries activity next to a house that is a single family detached residence for somebody, and next to a restaurant that has outdoor music, they've just always figured out how to get along in that type of mixed use community. The challenges we're starting to see now is that with those changing expectations of people that are moving there, they're not necessarily getting along as well as they used to. So it's something that we really have to figure out. Jim, you might want to talk about some of your experiences. You were in the middle of some of those battles between the been here's and the come here's that you had to deal with in Tillman.
Yeah, thanks, Miguel. I think one of the key things that we found out in getting everybody together was that they did value the authenticity of the working waterfront way of life. And a lot of people, even the retirees that came there, came because they liked it, because it was so authentic and real. But preserving that authentic way of life, as we've come to find out, is a real challenge. So when identifying where those working waterfront assets are found, those assets were identified together, in a group setting. It's kind of changed a little bit here and there, but for the most part, people were able to express their opinions about what they thought working waterfront really was, where it was located, and then what supporting uses and things that were necessary to keep that way of life. And we found also that some of the supporting businesses had real challenges meeting the regulatory environment that they operated under, and if there was any way that they could get some break from that. And we did that through that working waterfront overlay district that's under consideration now to incentivize certain kinds of uses that were supportive of those working waterfront uses.
Terrific, thank you. All right, I'm going to switch over to Chattanooga. Let me ask Sharita, I've got a question for you. How has the image of Chattanooga changed in recent decades, and how has this changed? Who is coming to Chattanooga? Talk a little bit about what still has to be done on the redevelopment front, if you could.
Sure. Some of the changes we've seen obviously have been driven by some of the in-migration, folks moving to Chattanooga from other areas. Much like Wareham, we're a city that is that historically been a pass-through city. People will pass through Chattanooga on the way to Atlanta or Nashville or Birmingham or Knoxville. And so, as a result of that, we have started to see folks that have passed through, they stop for a day or two, they enjoy the scenery, they like it, and then they decide, you know what, maybe I should set up shop here. So we have a history of heavy industry. So we've got some heavy industrial areas that are both along the riverfront and just half a mile or two in from our riverfront. But we also have a downtown district that touches the riverfront. So where you'll have Class A office buildings 2 or 3 blocks from the riverfront, you might have heavy industrial manufacturing 2 or 3 blocks west of that. That's right on the riverfront. And what we're seeing is there are companies that want to be in Chattanooga. They like sort of all the amenities, the quality of life. They like the access to the rest of the country. And at the end of the day, it's just the sort of the mix that we have in our downtown area, so that it's such that you could have heavy industrial and office and multifamily and single family all in close proximity to one another. And that's been, and it goes back to what Miguel was saying, it's been difficult to maintain some of that balance, whereas you have second generation accustomed to working in close proximity to heavy manufacturing. We have rail that goes through downtown, and then you will have some of the newcomers that are coming in from other areas that have never lived in close proximity to rail. They're not used to hearing horns or heavy machinery moving at 3 or 4 in the morning. And so again, it's that whole balance that we're trying to maintain and preserving those districts, because they are live, work, play districts, but they have very different characteristics. So if you're downtown high rise, Class A office, your live, work, play experience is very different from the folks that are in close proximity to heavy industrial manufacturing, Riverwalk access, waterfront.
Thanks, Sharita. I'm going to stay on Chattanooga. Jim, I want to talk a little bit about River City Company, and I just want to talk a little bit more about the kind of commitment that's necessary for a town to make in order for redevelopment to succeed. Yeah, Tess.
I'm getting it. Yep, I'm going.
Jim, you want me to repeat that question or you got it?
There we go.
There you are.
Yes. In my frenzy to try and unmute myself, I did not hear your question. So yes, please.
That's okay. What kind of commitment does a town need to have to make in order for redevelopment to succeed? Just following up at what Sharita said.
Yeah, so well, the commitment that we made here in Chattanooga was a financial commitment, first of all, and the formation of, we're lucky enough to have partners and 2 foundations here in Chattanooga based on Coca-Cola bottling inheritance. And those foundations were very instrumental in creating River City Company, which was formed in 1986 to come to work every day and implement the Tennessee River Park Master Plan. And so that was the commitment that the people of Chattanooga made. And we also work with those partners on a daily basis and continue to do so even today. And so that commitment is essential. I mean, to come to work every day and concentrate your efforts on a singular project like the Tennessee Riverwalk, which is has been instrumental in our recovery for Chattanooga.
Thanks, Jim. All right, let's hope, Bryce, if you're unmuted, can you answer my next question? What makes planning on the riverfront so different from planning in other areas? What are some of the biggest challenges and biggest opportunities?
Thanks, Joanne. You know, I think waterfront development can obviously be challenging. Climate change is the one that comes first to mind, I think, for many of us, which really is a challenge, but I would argue that challenges can be brainstormed, and with some vision, you can arrive to a win-win solution. And I think that's the way that we have to operate. More about that in a minute, maybe, but community engagement is very important, as Magdalena said, not only for ideas, but also for people to share their experiences with others, right? I mean, this is a time to come together and really think about something that has a lot of future potential, and it's an important life experience for people. It really is. So in Annapolis, we've been very recently performing video interviews with longtime citizens just to understand how they have interacted with City Dock and to get a very diverse kind of perspective on that. You know, people used to go there fishing as kids. We learned that people used to dive off of the bridge to Eastport and swim, something you don't see very often today. And then the idea is that we will share one or two of those with our meetings going forward as a way to help engage people and share some of those ideas, and also to hopefully archive them for the future. We're fortunate in today's world that there are also angel investors looking for green infrastructure projects and investments. So we have to take advantage of low interest rates and those development companies that are able to do those types of projects and bring their attention to some of these projects along the waterfront. And so I would say that while it's difficult working at the water, the fact that climate change has everyone's attention now, that there is funding available for these kinds of projects. Generally, I believe, though, that for these waterfront projects, that a vision and an idea-based approach can be most successful. You know, so you got to gather all the ideas, talk to the stakeholders, consider commercial viability also, and incorporate flexibility into your plan, and of course, build consensus. You know, I mean, changing uses, especially at the ground level, is the reason we need flexibility. I mean, there's kind of been this double whammy. Not only is it the way we distribute goods and services to people changing with Amazon and the internet, but also now with the pandemic, you know, it's just been a double whammy on these small businesses. And so this type of investment, green infrastructure investment into waterfront communities, can really create the kind of opportunity for people to expand and to maybe have tourism, but it's got to resonate with the locals in order to have the authenticity that it needs. So we can maybe control the ground level to some extent with overlay districts that focus on the percentages of glass and architectural criteria, things that can happen at the ground level, and even uses to some extent. But correct zoning may actually be more of a form-based zoning because we focus more on, you know, the envelope of the building and some of the design character of it, rather than simply on the use. And because those uses are changing, and as Dan Nees has said, it's really something we have to be aware of because it's clearly going to change. Buildings have to be flexible. And I think that's one reason why old warehouses have become so attractive to a lot of us because of some of their interior flexibility in terms of size and open floor plans. Years ago, I cut my teeth on a warehouse project in Chattanooga called Warehouse Row, which was right about the time that the River City effort was getting started, I think in the 80s. And I think those kind of warehouse projects have done well since then, and there's a reason for that. And that's one reason why some of our new architecture and some of the new placemaking that we're doing as a firm involves those types of structures that can be flexible and have universal space, if you will. Because even some uses like co-working may be viable at the ground level in today's world because of the fact that retail's not what it used to be, of course, as we said. Right. So, and lastly, I'd say there are opportunities that exist for cultural and nature tourism and education to continue some of these sunset industries. You know, in Maryland, we can do this by, you know, having some of our watermen take youngsters out on their work boats to haul in oysters and crabs, and some of the things that we're looking at in Easton and Cambridge. So anyway, these are authentic experiences are critical, as Jim said. So I think those are some of the challenges and things we can do.
Thanks, Bryce. That was awesome. And I saw the Chattanooga folks smiling during that reference. I've got a couple more questions. And in the meantime, please submit your questions to Kyle, who I'm going to check in with in a few moments to see if there are any audience questions. But I'm going to continue. And if this works well, Richard Hessler, can you hear me, Richard? Are you there? I have a question for you from Burlington.
I am here.
Yay. All right. We can't see you, but we love your voice. And no, that's okay. You know, it goes with the theme today. So, Richard, from Burlington's perspective, can you speak to the importance of pursuing sustainable and innovative streams of revenue and financing mechanisms? You knew I was going to go there.
Well, our experience was that that we relied heavily on tax increment financing. We also did use some HUD loans and then rolled them into our tax increment financing, essentially taking out the loans from HUD and then using the increment from our TIF district to service the debt on the 108 loans. But you know, I mean, I think that a team that's looking under all the rocks and trying to figure out all the various ways of putting projects together, and you know, I'm not entirely, like, tax increment financing has to meet any number of hurdles in order to demonstrate the appropriate nexus between the public and private development. And sometimes that gets fairly creative, and you end up fashioning development agreements that sort of move the money in ways that sort of boggles the mind. But in the end, you know, the background for those who weren't in the morning session was that I came at this from a position of being the city attorney who had to make sure that we were statutorily in compliance, and I found myself doing a lot of gymnastics in order to make it all work, and then getting the appropriate sign-offs and everything. But you know, I mean, I think that if you bring the right people on board and you work with the right development teams, the private developers, and establish the right relationships, that invariably there is a path to yes. It's just a matter of getting people together and finding out how it can be done. Now,
Thank you.
In some cases, it took us years and years. I mean, we worked on our Moran plant that I described this morning, which was a decommissioned coal plant, and repurposing that. That was actually decommissioned 10 years before we even established our TIF district, and we are working on it now. And it went through probably permutations of financing and repurposing probably a dozen times before we finally got something to go. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. And Karen, you know, you're not off the hook. I kept you busy this morning, but I want to know from the public support, which for all of these ideas is just so important to get that buy-in. So how do you garner, you know, public support for development initiatives that are intrinsically limited to a particular area? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. You know, I think that is always going to be an issue in communities where we have elected officials that are represented by different districts. I mean, they always want the money for their district, and the people who live there, you know, want the money to come to repair their sidewalks or build new parks in their neighborhood. So I think you really have to establish the relevance of your downtown or of your waterfront to their neighborhoods or to the other districts. You have to let them know why it's important. In Chattanooga, we started out by saying, you know, downtown is the heart of our community. It's historically where Chattanooga began, at the downtown. The river is why we are there. It's the cultural center of the community, as it is in most places. It's usually where your museums and theaters and things are located. So we talk to people a lot about that, and I guess that probably convinced some people, others it didn't. So I think it really came down to an economic question, and we had to show them why the downtown, why the riverfront is economically important to the area. Historically, downtowns have always been the economic engine of a community, and most of them continue to be today. If you look at the tax revenue, you'll probably find that your downtown generates proportionally a lot more tax revenue for your city than other parts of the community do. That was the case with us, especially if you look at tax revenue generated per acre. You're going to find that the downtown really outweighs everything else. I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense. You have bigger buildings closer together, they're multi-story, so per acre, the downtown packs a lot more bang for the buck than kind of our low-slung suburban areas. Typically, your low-density, single-family residential neighborhoods, they don't pay for themselves in terms of tax revenue and all of the costs that they demand for schools and roads and that sort of thing. So it really is, the downtown usually really is the economic engine that continues to drive a community and continues to pay for the schools and the sidewalks and the roads and everything else throughout the rest of the community.
Karen, thanks so much. I want to check in with Kyle to see if there are any questions from our listeners.
Oh, we did have one question in advance directed towards Ken and Wareham. You know, in terms of redevelopment and bringing in, you know, kind of new industries or new businesses, you know, has there been any talk in Wareham about dredging and bringing in small cruises or, you know, any other type of new business into the town?
Tess, if you can unmute Ken, please.
Ken should be unmuted.
No, he's not.
All right, well, we can put that on hold. I have another question for Sharita, if we'd like to move to that. You know, this kind of goes back to, you know, some of the conversation that we had this morning, but I mean, Chattanooga is still engaging in some planning, you know, looking ahead. So what still needs to be done in terms of redevelopment? You know, we've seen decades of it so far. So what's still on the table for your team and what still needs to be looked at?
I think some of what we've been looking at moving forward is infrastructure related. I mean, like most cities, we're seeing outdated infrastructure. It's water, sewer, it's areas without sidewalks. It's, again, increasing that sort of access to the riverfront. What does that look like? Some of it is looking at, you know, there was a time in our history where all the roads were built to take people out of downtown and away from the river. And now we're looking at how do we bring people back and what do those roads look like? So we're looking at road diets, wider sidewalks, sidewalks adjacent to buildings where you can put cafe style seating on it. We're looking at sort of linear parks. I mean, it's the public realm sort of infrastructure piece that we're really focused on moving forward. And that just, it's not, and again, I go back to, much of it is driven from how we're improving the quality of life for residents. It's not necessarily with a focus on tourism, although tourism, we're seeing the benefit from tourism as well. And Karen could probably add a little bit to that. But again, that focus is coming back to how do we improve the public realm for local residents and what does that look like as it relates to our riverfront? And so that's a big push for us moving forward and working with those public-private partnerships so that as developers are developing along the riverfront, it's putting in those requirements to make sure like those assets that we're looking to build in, that they're building those assets and doing that in partnership for us when it's not required by code.
I'll also add, Sharita, that we kind of learned from our mistakes over the years. You know, we have a lot of successes here in Chattanooga, and you referenced this earlier, Kyle, about the late 80s and early 90s planning that we did and the work that we did. And then we came back in 2000 and with the 21st Century Waterfront Plan. And so it's been, you know, 15 years since that was implemented, and we see the need to go back and fix some of the things that we learned through that process that could still have improvements. Some of the polish that's worn off of the things in the riverfront that need to have that attention ongoing. And so we're doing that again. River City Company is in the middle of the One Riverfront plan, and we're trying to be more inclusive of who we get outreach and input from. In the past, it's always been the same old folks that we always get at the same old planning meetings, and we realize that you can't just rely on that these days. You actually have to be very intentional, and someone was talking about this earlier about the outreach, and it's been very difficult, quite honestly, in the last 9 months or so to do so, but we're finding some successes and hearing those voices from not just the people who you always hear from. It's getting into those communities and getting those voices as well, and then going back to them after you hear what they're saying and telling them, here's what we heard and here's what we're thinking about doing, and making sure that you're testing those ideas along the way with the people that you're hearing from, and then also going back even later and saying, here's what we heard, here's what we did, and this is how we're trying to address the issues that we heard from all of the people that we're getting that input from. So I think it's important to do that, and we keep doing that over and over again, and in probably another 20 years, we'll be back doing the same thing along the riverfront, learning from the mistakes that we did this time.
Thanks, Jim and Sharita. Kyle, we've only got about 5 minutes left. Do you have any other questions, or can I have a few more? And I want to make sure I give a moment if Ken's unmuted. Ken?
I believe I am.
Perfect.
Okay.
Better Ken than me. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, Ken, do you want to answer that just quickly, because I'm mindful of the time? Do you want to answer the previous question and also give some key takeaways from what you heard and how Wareham is going to use some of this information?
Sure. On the first question, the downtown is split by a grade level train and road highway bridge, Route 6, that essentially cuts off boating access to the upper reaches around the Merchants Wharf. So we're talking about pedestrian access to the waterfront there. South of the bridges, we have working waterfront. We have shipbuilding and 2 marinas and recreational docks that exist there and has access to the Buzzards Bay. So we have a split in our long-term outlook. What may be that with sea level rise, we have to reconsider the bridges and think about ways that will address that as it comes. And at the same time, thinking about access through the waterway to the northern reaches as well. What I've learned is an awful lot. This is actually an excellent session with a lot of good ideas, and thank you all very much. I think what we're going to have to do is I'm going to have to hunker back down with the Redevelopment Authority and talk about strategies based on what you've presented to us about how we can proceed with, because we still have a big piece of this with the ownership of the town land and the state land in the downtown area. And we have interested developers who are coming forward as well. Maybe because of the opportunity zone, or maybe just because the market is such that it has that potential at this time. And we want to take advantage of that. So we'll go back and reconsider what we have heard and think about ways to take take it further.
Well, I know that the communities also who joined the session this morning outside of Wareham really appreciated the dialogue and the expertise coming from all of the folks. Dan Nees, you know you're not off the hook. I want to just call on you in the last couple minutes. Do you have any takeaways or final thoughts to close us out today from what you heard?
Well, the comment, I'm assuming everyone can hear me, but if not, we can all learn how to read lips in the next 2 minutes.
We hear you, Dan.
So, you know, the common theme obviously was engaging the community, keeping the community connected. You know, as you know, Joanne, and others listening in may not, my focus is on how to move fiscal resources into communities. And I want to go back for a second to a community I know really well, which is Annapolis, and Bryce Turner provided some information there. Ken made the joke about we hope that we don't have to have a disaster in order to have redevelopment. And he made that comment this morning as we were talking about Santa Cruz and the earthquake. But honestly, I think the genuine opportunity that all of these communities have is change, and specifically climate change and the impacts climate change is going to have. That is a big theme of what we've been trying to do with this project. And even over the last few months, I saw this as a major barrier, but I'm more and more seeing this as a tremendous opportunity to rethink how we rebuild our communities, redesign our communities. And it's just, and I've seen it in Annapolis, and Bryce was, again, a big leader in this. It was an opportunity to bring community members in who normally were much at odds with each other and got them to engage and to talk. So, you know, as much as this problem is a problem, it's also an opportunity. And I think we saw some parts of that in each of the communities that we brought in. And it was a really cool, diverse group of communities we had today. So that's what I walked away.
No, that's great. Thanks, Dan. I want to thank everyone who was our guest today. You were so amazing, and so much of what you shared with us in the morning session and just a snapshot this afternoon is going to be captured. We are going to share it with Wareham, of course, from each of our sessions, but what we're also going to do is be able to share it with a wider audience, all the people listening now, all the communities who might be interested to glean some of these great ideas. So with that, I would like to tee up our last series, our webinar in our series, which is January 6th. We're covering smart growth and strategic zoning for livable communities. We have Ranson, West Virginia, Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and Portland, Maine. If you would like to be a community that listens in and joins our closed session, can you please contact me, reach out to the SNEP Network, contact me and let me know. We're keeping it very small so we can have a good dialogue, but Wareham has generously opened the doors to have other communities join in. If you think that is right for you, please, I encourage you to consider joining us. With that, again, from the SNEP Network, I thank all of you for taking your time today, which was significant. Thank you for doing the podcast. Thanks for Kyle, always keeping us on track and moving us forward. Dan, thank you so much, being my partner in crime here. Everyone have a great rest of your afternoon, great week, great holidays. Bye-bye all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great job.